A stone wall stretches across a lonely frontier, silent and imposing. Yet the true guardian of an ancient border was not made of stone. For empires like Rome, Persia, and China, security depended on a weapon you could not see, a sophisticated web of spies, informants, and secret messages that formed an invisible shield. This video will reconstruct how these complex espionage networks actually function to protect the ancient world. We will uncover how a Roman supply officer could become a master spy, and how a Persian king supposedly heard whispers from 1,000 miles away. What hidden systems did leaders trust to see beyond the horizon and hold their world together? This invisible shield was a deliberate, organized machine. It went far beyond the occasional bribe or the rumor overheard in a marketplace. These were professional systems funded by the state and built with a clear purpose to transform uncertainty into actionable knowledge. At its heart were three dedicated pillars. The first was the agent in the field, the individual tasked with seeing what others could not. This was not always a cloak and dagger figure, but often someone with perfect cover, a merchant traveling the caravan routes, a diplomat with access to foreign courts, or a local chieftain paid for his loyalty. Their mission was to answer urgent questions. How many warriors has the nomadic chieftain assembled, and where are they camping? Is the rival kingdom repairing its forts or massing troops near a mountain pass? The second pillar focused inward, monitoring the frontier provinces themselves. An empire's borderlands were often its most volatile regions, populated by recently conquered peoples whose loyalty could not be taken for granted. The network's eyes and ears here watched for signs of dissent, for local governors growing too powerful, or for communities secretly aiding the enemy across the river. This internal surveillance was as crucial as watching the external foe, for a rebellion from within could collapse a frontier faster than any army. Finally, the third pillar was defensive, a game of mirrors known as counterintelligence. Its sole purpose was to find, mislead, or neutralize the spies that other empires were undoubtedly sending across the same border. This created a hidden war within the war, a silent contest where identifying a single enemy courier could be as valuable as winning a cavalry skirmish. Together, these functions formed a complete security apparatus, one designed not just to react to threats, but to anticipate them, to make the vast and vulnerable borderlands somehow knowable and secure. But how did such a system function in practice? Who were the people that made this invisible shield real? Consider the case of Rome, an empire whose borders stretched from the rainy highlands of Britain to the deserts of Syria. Its most versatile and feared intelligence operatives began their service not in shadowy back alleys, but in the granaries and warehouses of the legions. They were the Frumentarii, a name derived from the Latin word for grain. Originally, their duty was purely logistical, to requisition and secure the vital wheat supplies that fed the vast frontier armies. A soldier cannot hold a wall on an empty stomach, and the Frumentarii ensured the grain kept flowing. This logistical role gave them the perfect cover for a far more sensitive mission. They traveled constantly, moving between legions, frontier outposts, and provincial towns on official supply business. Who would question a grain officer checking on shipments? Yet these officers carried two sets of orders, one for the granary and another for the emperor. Over time, especially from the 2nd century onward, their function dramatically expanded. They became the imperial couriers for sensitive messages, the investigators of provincial corruption, and the watchers for signs of rebellion or sedition. In the borderlands, this dual role was incredibly powerful. A Frumentarius could arrive at a fort, audit its food stores to ensure the garrison was ready, and in the same visit, discreetly assess the loyalty of its commander or gather rumors from local traders about movements in the tribal lands beyond the river. They were the perfect internal security tool, men with legitimate reason to be anywhere, asking questions anyone in the Roman system was obligated to answer. While not traditional spies sent into foreign kingdoms, their intelligence from the empire's own periphery was often the first warning of external threat, gleaned from the tense, interconnected communities that lived along the lines. The very bureaucrat ensuring a legion had bread could also be the one uncovering a plot that might topple a province. This transformation from supply clerk to secret policeman shows the pragmatism of Roman security, turning an existing, mundane system into a pervasive web of control. While Rome perfected the art of internal surveillance, another empire mastered intelligence on a truly continental scale. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, stretching from the Nile to the Indus River, faced a monumental challenge of governance. How does one man, the King of Kings, rule such an immense and diverse tapestry of peoples and landscapes? The answer, according to the Greek historian Herodotus, was a system he poetically called the eyes and ears of the king. This was not a metaphor, but the title of a formal, state-funded intelligence corps. These royal inspectors were the king's personal agents, endowed with immense authority to travel anywhere within the empire's domains. Their primary mission was to watch the watchers, to ensure the loyalty and efficiency of the provincial governors, known as satraps, who ruled territories as vast as kingdoms themselves. A satrap in distant Anatolia or Bactria wielded great power, commanding local armies and collecting taxes. The temptation to rebel, to carve out an independent realm, was a constant threat. The eyes and ears were the counterweight to this danger. Traveling the famed Royal Road, a highway system built for rapid communication, these inspectors could appear without warning at a satrap's palace. They had the right to review financial records, inspect troop readiness, and listen to the grievances of local populations. Their reports traveled directly back to the king, bypassing the very satrap they were investigating. This created a powerful psychological deterrent, a lingering sense that the sovereign's gaze could fall upon any corner of the empire at any time. For the frontier regions, this system served a dual purpose. While monitoring the satrap's loyalty, these agents also gathered vital strategic intelligence about the lands beyond the border. They would assess the morale of frontier garrisons, evaluate the stability of buffer states, and compile reports on the movements of nomadic tribes or rival powers. In a realm where news could take months to travel, the eyes and ears provided a stream of verified, actionable information that helped bind the empire's vulnerable edges to its center. It was a breathtakingly simple yet effective concept, transforming the vastness of the empire from a weakness into a source of strength, all through the quiet, relentless work of trusted men on a long, dusty road. Across the world in ancient China, the philosophy of intelligence was being codified into an art form. During the chaotic warring states period, where rival kingdoms clashed for supremacy, spying became not just a tactic but a foundational element of statecraft. The great military strategist Sun Tzu devoted an entire chapter of his work, The Art of War, to the use of what he called jian. He categorized these agents with chilling precision, detailing 5 distinct types. There were local spies recruited from a target area, inward spies who were officials of the enemy state, converted spies who were enemy agents turned to your cause, doomed spies fed false information to be captured, and living spies who returned with the truth. Sun Tzu's famous axiom that all warfare is based on deception found its ultimate tool in this shadowy ecosystem, where knowing an enemy's plans was more valuable than 10,000 soldiers. This intellectual framework laid the groundwork for a system far more organized than simple battlefield trickery. When the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, unified China, he faced the monumental task of holding it together. His solution was a bureaucracy of control, and intelligence was its sharpest edge. To protect his newly connected frontiers, including the colossal project of the Great Wall, he needed more than just soldiers on the ramparts. He needed eyes everywhere. The Qin dynasty, and later the Han that followed, developed extensive secret police and informant networks. These agents were tasked with a dual mission: external vigilance and internal conformity. Along the northern frontier, they monitored the nomadic Xiongnu Confederation, gathering details on troop movements and leadership disputes. But they also watched the Han's own border commanders and settlers, ensuring no one was trading illicitly with the nomads or plotting defection. This internal surveillance extended deep into the empire along the emerging Silk Road. As trade routes stretched into Central Asia, they became arteries of commerce and vectors of potential subversion. Imperial agents, often posing as merchants or traveling scholars, were deployed to oasis towns and distant way stations. Their job was to listen, to report on the loyalty of local allies, to track the flow of goods that could mask the movement of weapons or messages, and to counter the influence of foreign powers. The Great Wall was a physical barrier, but the true security of the frontier was maintained by this invisible network of trust and betrayal, where a whispered conversation in a caravanserai could be as strategically important as a battle on the steppe. The legacy of the giant evolved from Sun Tzu's theory into a vast, quiet machinery that helped an empire watch its borders and its own soul. Gathering the secret was only half the battle. The true test was delivering it. A detailed report on enemy troop movements was utterly useless if it arrived after the army had already marched. A warning of rebellion meant nothing if it could not reach the capital in time. The lifeline of every ancient intelligence network was its ability to move information across impossible distances, and this challenge demanded extraordinary ingenuity. The first priority was often speed, and empires invested heavily in infrastructure to achieve it. The Persian Royal Road and the Roman Cursus Publicus were not just trade routes, they were state-sponsored communication highways. Relay stations were established at regular intervals, stocked with fresh horses and dedicated couriers. A messenger could ride at a gallop to the next post, hand off his dispatches to a waiting rider on a rested horse, and continue this sprint for hundreds of miles. This system turned a journey of weeks into a matter of days, allowing intelligence from a distant frontier to reach the decision-makers while it was still relevant. But raw speed was not enough. The message itself had to be secure. This is where the art of cryptography was born in the ancient world. One of the earliest and most famous methods was the citale used by the Spartans. A narrow strip of leather was wound around a specific sized rod, and the message was written lengthwise along it. When unwound, the strip appeared to hold a random jumble of letters, only becoming legible when wrapped around an identical rod. Simpler codes involved pre-arranged substitutions, where a seemingly innocent merchant's letter might hide a military report based on a shared cipher key. For the most urgent and visible signals, empires turned to light and fire. Beacon chains were a brilliant, low-tech solution for rapid, long-distance alert. A network of towers or high points was established along a frontier. The sighting of a hostile force would trigger a fire on the first tower. The next tower would see it and light its own, creating a wave of light that could race across a province in minutes, not days. This was a binary signal. It could not convey complex details, but its message was unmistakable: the border has been breached. Some cultures even employed homing pigeons for specific, point-to-point communication, their innate navigational abilities providing a reliable, if limited, aerial courier service. The effectiveness of an entire spy network, with all its agents and informants, ultimately hinged on these fragile threads of communication. A broken cipher, a captured courier, or a foggy night that hid a beacon's light could mean the difference between a kingdom saved and a frontier lost. The silent war of intelligence was fought not just in shadowy rooms, but on every road, hilltop, and in every seemingly ordinary letter carried by a tired man on a fast horse. The silent courier racing down the royal road now faced his greatest peril, carrying the very secret that could doom him. If his message was discovered, the intelligence network would unravel. To survive, ancient agents mastered the art of making information vanish, not by destroying it, but by hiding it in plain sight. This craft split into two complementary disciplines: cryptography, scrambling a message's meaning, and steganography, concealing its very existence. The Spartan citale was a brilliant early cryptographic device. A sender would wrap a thin leather strip in a tight spiral around a specific cylindrical rod. He would then write his message lengthwise down the rod, one letter on each full turn of the strip. When unwound, the leather revealed only a jumble of seemingly random characters. The message only reassembled into coherent words when the recipient, possessing an identical rod, wound the strip back around it. Without that exact diameter of wood, the cipher was nearly unbreakable, a physical key for a textual lock. For simpler, faster communication, many networks relied on substitution ciphers. A pre-arranged code sheet, perhaps memorized, would dictate that a certain word or symbol stood for an entire phrase. A merchant's letter discussing the price of olive oil and pottery shipments could, to a trained eye, detail troop numbers and fort locations. The message was right there, but its true meaning was invisible to anyone without the key. Sometimes the goal was not to scramble the message, but to ensure no one even knew a message was being sent. This is where steganography shone. Invisible inks were a favorite tool, crafted from everyday, unsuspected substances. Milk, lemon juice, or the extracted juices of certain plants could be used to write on parchment or papyrus. Once dry, the writing would disappear completely, leaving a seemingly blank sheet. To reveal the hidden text, the recipient would gently heat the material near a flame or candle, and the organic compounds would caramelize, turning a faint brown and bringing the secret words to light. The wax tablet, a common ancient notepad, offered another perfect hiding place. A spy could write an innocent message on the wax surface, then scrape it smooth again. But if he pressed just hard enough with his stylus, the writing would leave a permanent impression on the wooden backing beneath. To an inspector, it was a blank, reusable tablet. To the right person who knew to apply a thin layer of fresh wax or dust, the indented message from the previous layer would appear like a ghost in the medium. Even clothing and personal items became tools. Messages were written on the thin inner lining of a sandal sole, where the sweat and grime of travel would help conceal them, or sewn into the hem of a tunic. A hollowed-out walking stick or a sealed compartment within a seemingly ordinary clay oil lamp could carry tightly rolled scrolls. These methods were not just clever tricks, they were essential for survival. An agent behind enemy lines lived a double life where a single slip meant discovery. The ability to carry critical intelligence openly, yet invisibly, transformed every traveler, every trader, and every piece of mundane baggage into a potential courier. It meant a border was not just a line on a map, but a filter through which secrets could flow like water through stone, unseen and unstoppable. Behind every coded message and watchtower beacon was a person, a living, breathing node in the network. The human element was the most fragile and unpredictable component of frontier intelligence, a mosaic of official operatives, hidden agents, and local informants, each with their own motives and fears. At the most visible level were the official military scouts, known to the Romans as explorators. These were not spies in the traditional sense, but elite reconnaissance troops, often cavalrymen chosen for their endurance, keen observation, and knowledge of the terrain beyond the frontier. Their mission was direct and dangerous, to ride out in small patrols, penetrate deep into unmapped or hostile territory, and gather tactical intelligence on enemy numbers, movements, and fortifications. They were the empire's forward eyes, and their reports could determine where a legion marched or where a wall was built. Their loyalty was typically unquestioned, bound by military oath, but their survival depended on stealth and speed, a constant gamble against being spotted and pursued by enemy patrols in the open wild. Far more shadowy were the undercover agents, individuals whose entire identity was a carefully constructed lie. These were the merchants whose caravans crossed borders laden with goods and secrets, the diplomats whose official negotiations masked subtle probing, or the disaffected nobles from a rival kingdom who offered their services for gold or promise of power. A merchant was the perfect cover, granted natural reason to travel, to ask about local conditions, road security, and the mood of populations. He could note the construction of new bridges capable of bearing an army's weight, or count the ships in a foreign harbor while haggling over the price of silk. Their motivation was often a complex blend of patriotism, profit, and personal ambition. The risk, however, was absolute. Discovery meant a swift and severe end, with no claim to diplomatic immunity. Theirs was a life of perpetual performance, where a single slip in accent, a forgotten local custom, or a moment of recognized hesitation could unravel years of patient work. Perhaps the most crucial, yet most volatile, assets were the local informants recruited from the border populations themselves. These were the tribesmen who grazed their flocks in the disputed hills, the farmers whose fields lay between rival forts, or the minor chieftains whose loyalty was for sale to the highest bidder. They offered something no foreign agent could: intimate, ground-level knowledge of the land and its people. They knew the hidden mountain passes, the seasonal moods of the river fords, and the internal rivalries within a neighboring tribe. Their motivations were rarely ideological, more often driven by simple pragmatism: payment in silver or salt, protection for their family, or a chance to settle a score with a local rival by feeding information to an external power. Their loyalties were famously fluid, a fact well understood by the intelligence officers who handled them. An informant might take payment from both Rome and a Germanic confederation, playing a double game until the balance of power shifted. Managing these assets required not just gold, but a deep understanding of local politics and personal honor. The intelligence they provided was priceless, but it always came with a question: was this truth, or was it a story crafted to manipulate the very empire that paid for it? This constant dance of trust and betrayal, played out in the smoky huts and bustling market stalls of the frontier, was where the theoretical network of spies met the messy, human reality of the ancient world. The caravan cities were the beating hearts of this silent trade. In the dusty oasis of Palmyra, a merchant from Rome could share a meal with a Parthian trader, their conversation a delicate dance of business and subtle probing. The talk would be of bandits on the eastern routes, the rising price of Sogdian steel, and the health of a certain Khan whose warriors had been seen massing near the Oxus River. Every piece of commercial gossip held potential military value. The Caravanserai, a fortified inn for travelers, was perhaps the greatest intelligence-gathering forum the ancient world ever invented. Under one roof, exhausted men from a dozen cultures exchanged stories, complaints, and rumors after weeks on the trail. A hand diplomat, resting on his journey west, might listen intently to a Scythian guide's tale of a recent clash between two steppe tribes, information that could predict which way the nomads would turn next. The goods themselves were a form of intelligence. A sudden scarcity of Chinese silk in a Bactrian market could indicate political turmoil or a closed pass in the Pamir Mountains. An unusual influx of Roman glassware into Kushan territory might suggest a new diplomatic alliance being negotiated. Spies did not need to penetrate the innermost courts of a rival empire. they could simply set up a stall in the bazaar of Samarkand and listen. The Sogdian merchants, the legendary traders of Central Asia, were masters of this dual role. Their network stretched from Chang'an to Constantinople, and their loyalty was first and foremost to profit. This made them ideal, if unpredictable, assets. A Roman intelligence officer could cultivate a relationship with a Sogdian merchant, funding his ventures in exchange for detailed reports on the conditions of roads, the strength of frontier garrisons, and the political leanings of local rulers across the Persian Empire. The Han court did the same, using their own merchant contacts to monitor the volatile Xiongnu Confederation to the north. The Silk Road, therefore, created a paradox. It was a channel of immense cultural and economic connection, but it also functioned as a permeable border, a zone where secrets were the most valuable commodity of all. Empires invested heavily in controlling these oasis hubs, not merely for the tariff revenue, but for the flow of information. A city like Palmyra grew wealthy and powerful precisely because it served as a neutral ground for this exchange, a place where the invisible war of intelligence was fought with whispered conversations over cups of wine, rather than swords on a battlefield. The safety of distant capitals often depended on what was overheard in a crowded caravanserai courtyard 1,000 miles away. Yet for every secret gathered, a rival empire was trying to do the same. The Silent War had a defensive front, a constant effort to hunt the hunters and blind the enemy's eyes. This shadowy contest, known as counterintelligence, was where the invisible shield turned inward, becoming a filter to catch the whispers before they could escape. The first and most obvious line of defense was the physical border itself. While walls and forts were symbols of military might, their gates and checkpoints served a more subtle purpose. Roman guards at a frontier post like those in Syria were not just looking for smugglers or armed bands. They were trained to profile travelers. A merchant's story would be scrutinized for inconsistencies, his cargo searched for hidden compartments, his documents checked against known lists of suspicious persons. The goal was to identify the courier, the individual whose very job was to move unseen. A traveler showing undue nervousness, possessing wealth beyond his apparent station, or carrying writing materials when illiterate, could find himself detained for further questioning. Interrogation was a refined art. It relied less on force and more on psychological pressure and clever deception. A suspected spy might be isolated, fed false information, and then released, only to be watched to see where he went and who he contacted. His story would be checked and rechecked for the smallest flaw. The Roman historian Tacitus mentions cases where Parthian agents posing as refugees were uncovered because their knowledge of their supposed homeland's minor geography was suspiciously perfect, or because their stated reasons for fleeing did not match the known political climate. Beyond the border posts, the network turned its gaze on its own people. The vetting of local officials and allied chieftains was continuous and critical. A border governor in charge of a legion had immense power, and his loyalty was paramount. Imperial agents like the Frumentarii would discreetly monitor his communications, audit his finances for unexplained wealth that might suggest bribes from a foreign power, and listen to the grievances of his subordinates. The sudden, unannounced arrival of an inspector from the capital was often enough to deter treachery, a powerful reminder that the emperor's ears were always listening. The most sophisticated counterintelligence tactic, however, was the double agent. This was the ultimate game of mirrors. Instead of capturing an enemy spy, you turned him. Through a combination of coercion, offer of greater reward, or simple survival instinct, the captured agent would agree to continue his work, but now feeding false information back to his original masters. A double agent in Syria, supposedly reporting to a Parthian spymaster, could provide meticulously crafted lies about Roman troop weaknesses, supply shortages, or planned campaigns, leading the enemy to make catastrophic miscalculations. The Romans were masters of this, using turned agents to misdirect Parthian armies or to identify entire networks of informants within their own territory, who could then be quietly rounded up. This defensive shadow war created an atmosphere of pervasive suspicion in the borderlands, a place where trust was a currency spent very carefully. It meant that protecting a secret was often a more complex and relentless task than stealing one, a never-ending process of sifting truth from deception within your own ranks, always wondering if the eyes watching the frontier were loyal, or if they were already reporting everything they saw to the enemy beyond the river. The Roman intelligence model did not vanish with the fall of the West, it evolved. In the Eastern Roman Empire, centered on Constantinople, the old ways were refined into a more disciplined and bureaucratic machine. This was the age of the agents in Rebus, a name that translates roughly to men engaged in affairs. They began as an elite corps of imperial couriers, the successors to the Frumentarii, but their role expanded into something far more comprehensive. They were the nervous system of a state that was constantly under threat. A formal inspectorate and intelligence service rolled into one. Their primary duty was to ensure the emperor's will was carried out to the farthest corners of the realm, which meant constant travel along the vast network of roads that still connected the empire. A single agent would be assigned a specific route, a cursus, and he was responsible for the security and efficiency of every posting station along that stretch. He checked that the horses were healthy, that the station masters were honest, and that the flow of official communication was unimpeded. But this logistical duty was a perfect cover for his real work, observation. As he moved, he gathered political and military intelligence from provincial governors and military commanders. He listened for whispers of discontent or disloyalty, and he reported directly back to the master of officers in Constantinople, bypassing the normal chain of command entirely. This made him a powerful and often feared figure in the border provinces. His arrival was not announced, and his authority was absolute. For the empire's long, contested frontiers, especially the volatile border with the Sassanid Persian Empire to the east, these men were indispensable. They were the eyes that watched the watchers, ensuring that a duke commanding the frontier legions in Syria or Armenia remained loyal, and that his reports on Persian troop movements could be trusted. During the endless cycles of war and tense peace with the Sassanids, the speed and reliability of intelligence was everything. An agent in Rebus could carry a vital warning from the Euphrates frontier back to the capital with ruthless efficiency, or deliver the emperor's secret orders for a preemptive strike. Later, when the explosive rise of the Arab caliphates presented an existential threat, these same networks were stretched to their limit. They had to monitor not just traditional armies, but the rapid, fluid advances of new forces. The agents in Rebus became a key instrument in a desperate struggle for survival, trying to maintain a coherent picture of the frontier as entire provinces were lost. Their work represents the ultimate bureaucratization of the spy, transforming the informal agent of the early empire into a cog in a vast administrative machine, one whose quiet journeys along dusty roads were a lifeline for an empire perpetually on the defensive. But the silent war was not only fought from within stone walls and bureaucratic offices. For the settled empires, their greatest intelligence challenge often came not from a rival state, but from the vast, open horizon itself. The true masters of frontier espionage were not the empires defending borders, but the nomadic confederations that flowed across them. From the Xiongnu on China's northern frontier to the Huns and later the Mongols, these steppe cultures possessed an intelligence apparatus born not of bureaucracy, but of an entire way of life. Their model was fluid, decentralized, and devastatingly effective, turning the very openness the empires feared into their greatest weapon. Where Rome or China relied on fixed networks and written reports, the nomads' intelligence was woven into the fabric of their mobility. Every hunting party, every seasonal migration, Every trading excursion to a frontier market town was, in essence, a reconnaissance patrol. A horseman moving his herd across the grasslands was not just a herder, he was a censor. He noted the condition of pastures, the water levels in rivers and lakes, and the movements of other clans. More importantly, he observed the sedentary world at its edges, watching the comings and goings from distant fortress gates, assessing the readiness of patrols, and identifying unguarded passes through mountain ranges. This information did not need to be formally reported up a chain of command. It was shared organically around campfires and at seasonal gatherings of the tribes. The leadership of a Khan or chieftain thus had access to a constantly updating, living map of the entire frontier, compiled from 1,000 individual observations. This gave them a superior tactical picture, an understanding of the terrain and the enemy's routines that was both intimate and immediate. Their loose tribal structure, which seemed like a weakness to imperial bureaucrats, was in fact a profound intelligence asset. Without a fixed capital or a rigid hierarchy, there was no central node for an enemy spy network to infiltrate or target. A Roman agent could not easily identify a Hun spymaster in a tent city that might move tomorrow. The network was the people themselves, and its center was wherever the leadership chose to pitch its tents. This made counterintelligence against them nearly impossible for settled empires. You could not capture their couriers on a known road because their messengers were simply riders moving cross-country. You could not decipher a centralized archive of reports because the intelligence lived in memory and oral tradition. Furthermore, their ability to infiltrate sedentary societies was unparalleled. Nomadic groups were not monolithic. Many clans and individuals lived on the fringes of empires, trading, serving as mercenaries, or seeking refuge. These communities became perfect listening posts. A Hun blacksmith working in a Roman frontier town, or a Xiongnu trader regularly visiting Chinese markets, could gather detailed information on garrison strength, supply levels, and political tensions, then carry it back to the steppe with little suspicion. They moved freely in a world that saw them as peripheral, their knowledge dismissed as the gossip of outsiders. When a major nomadic confederation like the Mongols under Genghis Khan organized, they systematized this innate advantage. They employed scouts who could ride for days without stopping, and they cultivated networks of merchants and travelers along the Silk Road long before a campaign began, treating information about distant kingdoms as a strategic resource to be collected as diligently as horses or bows. This created a staggering asymmetry. The empire built walls and watched them, believing intelligence was about holding a line. The nomads saw the entire landscape as their domain, and intelligence was about understanding its flow. The static model of espionage, for all its sophistication, was often left blind by an enemy that had no fixed place to watch and no permanent border to defend. A spy in the ancient world operated within a world of profound silence and shadow. He had no satellite to show him an army's camp from the heavens, no device to intercept a whispered conversation from a mile away, and no means to instantly verify the tale of a nervous informant. The technological toolkit of antiquity was, by our standards, shockingly limited, and this fundamental constraint shaped every aspect of the intelligence game, making it a delicate and deeply human endeavor. The most glaring absence was any form of long-range surveillance. A Roman agent on the German frontier could not peer over the next forested hill, let alone see deep into tribal lands. His horizon was the distance a man could ride or walk and return to report. Information about enemy movements days or weeks away was always second or third hand, filtered through the perceptions and motives of scouts, traders, or turncoats. There was no electronic interception, no way to capture a message that was not physically carried by a courier. The security of a cipher or a hidden letter was absolute, but so was the blindness to any communication you could not physically acquire. This meant the entire system relied on the frail, fallible human link. A network was only as strong as the courage of its agent in the field, the loyalty of its bought informant, and the endurance of the courier racing against time. Verification was a constant, nagging problem. A report from a local chieftain that a rival king was massing troops might be true, or it might be a clever ruse to provoke a preemptive Roman strike that would weaken the chieftain's own enemy. There was no way to quickly send a second team to confirm, no reconnaissance flight to photograph the alleged camp. Decisions of war and peace, the movement of legions, the fate of provinces, often hinged on a single, unverifiable piece of information delivered by a single, potentially unreliable person. This made intelligence inherently stale. By the time a detailed report traveled from the Parthian border to Rome, the situation on the ground could have changed completely. The army you were warned about might have disbanded, marched in a different direction, or already launched its attack. The intelligence was not real-time data. It was a historical snapshot, a story about what had been happening, with no guarantee it still was. This fragility forced a different kind of wisdom upon commanders and kings. They could not wait for perfect information because it would never arrive. Instead, they had to become masters of probability, weighing the source's reliability against the risk of inaction, and understanding that even the best spy network could deliver a devastating lie. The invisible shield was not made of steel, but of trust, guesswork, and the hope that the man on the fast horse was both loyal and lucky. The Euphrates River was more than a border, it was a permanent wound. For centuries, the Roman and Parthian empires faced each other across its muddy flow, a line drawn through a landscape of deserts, mountains, and fiercely independent client kingdoms. This was not a static wall, but a living, breathing zone of perpetual tension, and the invisible war here was fought with relentless intensity. Both Rome and Parthia understood that the first army to cross the river in force would ignite a major war, so the goal of intelligence was not merely to watch the enemy, but to understand his intent, to measure his resolve without provoking the very conflict everyone feared. Primary mission for spies on both sides was tracking army movements. A Roman legion on the march was a colossal undertaking, thousands of men, animals, and wagons kicking up a dust cloud visible for miles. But where was it going? Was it a routine transfer to another fort, or the vanguard of an invasion force? Parthian agents, often posing as traders or shepherds in the scrublands of Syria, would count units, note the direction of march, and crucially, observe what the legion brought with it. An army moving with its full siege train, heavy artillery, and bridging equipment was a very different threat than one on a punitive raid. This information, raced back east by Parthian couriers, could give the King of Kings precious weeks to muster his own formidable cavalry from the far corners of his empire. Equally critical was the political chessboard of the buffer states, with Armenia standing as the most volatile prize. This mountainous kingdom, straddling the vital crossroads between the two empires, swore allegiance to whoever held the strongest hand at the moment. The intelligence battle for Armenia was a subtle one, fought in its royal court at Artaxata more than on its mountain passes. Both Rome and Parthia poured money and promises into the pockets of Armenian nobles, cultivating factions loyal to their cause. A Roman Frumentarius might arrive with a chest of gold and a promise of military support, while a Parthian agent of the king's eyes would whisper warnings of Roman treachery and remind the Armenian king of ancient ties. The goal was to install a compliant ruler, a client king who would allow troops to pass, provide intelligence, and deny the enemy a strategic foothold. A single report from a well-placed source in the Armenian court, revealing that the king was secretly negotiating with Parthia, could trigger a preemptive Roman intervention or a targeted assassination, changing the balance of power along the entire frontier. This shadow war for loyalty made every Armenian nobleman a potential intelligence asset, and every royal succession a moment of extreme peril. The terrain itself was a third actor in this drama, a brutal landscape that dictated how intelligence was gathered and moved. South of Armenia, the frontier dissolved into the Syrian desert, a vast, open expanse where Parthian horse archers could appear as if from nowhere. Here, Rome relied heavily on the nomadic Arab tribes, particularly the powerful Pomerans. These desert dwellers were the eyes of the empire in the trackless waste. They knew every waterhole, every hidden wadi, and the movements of every caravan or war party. Roman intelligence officers paid them well for reports of Parthian cavalry concentrations deep in the desert, information that was impossible to get any other way. In the north, the rugged Taurus and Armenian highlands presented a different challenge. Here, movement was channeled through narrow passes and high valleys. Control of these geographic choke points was everything, and so intelligence focused on who held them. Local mountain tribes, often as independent as the Armenians, were cultivated by both sides. A chieftain controlling a key pass could be bribed to allow a spy through, or to report when enemy scouts were using his territory. The land did not forgive ignorance. A Roman commander planning a campaign needed to know not just where the Parthian army was, but whether the mountain passes were clear of snow, if the desert wells were still drinkable, and which local guide could be trusted not to lead his legion into an ambush. In this enduring struggle, the Euphrates was just a symbol. The real border was a shifting, intangible thing, made of whispered secrets in mountain villages, the loyalties of desert shepherds, and the fears of kings in distant capitals, all constantly measured and weighed by the silent men who moved between them. The Great Wall was not an end but a beginning. For the Han Dynasty, its massive ramparts of tamped earth and stone were less a final barrier than a fortified base of operations, a launch point for the real work of frontier security which happened far to the north in the rolling grasslands of the steppe. Their adversary was the Xiongnu, a powerful confederation of nomadic tribes whose swift cavalry could appear without warning, raid a border province, and vanish back into the horizon before a Han army could be mustered. To defend an empire, the Han could not simply wait behind their wall. They had to learn to see the invisible, to understand the politics of the horse-born tribes, and to turn their enemies against each other. This demanded an intelligence network that operated not on roads but on horseback, and whose currency was not just silver but subtle influence. The Han established a dedicated office, the Colonel Protector of the dependent states, which was far more than a diplomatic post. It was the headquarters for frontier intelligence, tasked with managing relations with the Xiongnu and, more quietly, with penetrating their world. Its agents were diplomats, interpreters, and military officers who traveled into Xiongnu territory under the guise of maintaining treaties or delivering gifts. These missions were delicate performances. A Han envoy would arrive at the mobile court of a Xiongnu Chanyu, or supreme leader, bearing lavish presents of silk, grain, and luxury goods. The public purpose was to affirm peace and the tributary relationship. The hidden purpose was observation. The envoy would note the size and mood of the Chanyu's retinue, gauge the health of his herds, and listen intently to the gossip among the lesser nobles. He was there to assess the Confederacy's strength and, more importantly, its internal fractures. The Xiongnu were not a monolithic empire, but a loose alliance of clans often vying for power. A skilled Han agent could identify a disgruntled prince, a clan leader jealous of the Chanyu's favor, or a region suffering from poor grazing. This intelligence was priceless, for it revealed pressure points. The Han perfected the art of using diplomacy to wage a silent war. When they identified a rival to the ruling Chanyu, they might extend secret promises of support, offering weapons and recognition if he challenged his leader. This strategy of fostering internal division, known as using barbarians to control barbarians, was a cornerstone of their policy. By subtly encouraging strife within the Xiongnu elite, the Han could keep the Confederacy preoccupied with its own internal conflicts, preventing it from uniting for a major assault on the wall. The network's reach extended beyond the royal court. Han agents cultivated relationships with Xiongnu traders who came to frontier markets. These traders, in exchange for favorable terms or outright bribes, would provide ground-level reports. They knew which grazing lands were in use, which clans were feuding, and if there were unusual gatherings of warriors in a distant valley. This information allowed Han commanders to anticipate the direction and timing of raids, moving troops to threatened sectors of the wall before the Xiongnu even began their charge. In its most aggressive form, this shadow war could turn lethal. Historical records suggest that on more than one occasion, Han intelligence facilitated the removal of a particularly aggressive Xiongnu leader. This was never a direct military confrontation, but a quiet operation using proxies, perhaps by supplying a rival clan with the means or the encouragement to act. The goal was regime change, installing a more pliable leader who would honor treaties and keep the peace. For the Han, the Great Wall was a physical symbol of their civilization, but their true security was woven from a far more complex tapestry, one made of whispered alliances in felt tents, of silks that carried hidden intentions, and of a deep, calculated understanding that the greatest strength against a mobile foe was not a higher wall, but better information and the cunning to use it. An ambassador's official scroll often concealed a second, secret set of instructions. In the ancient world, the roles of diplomat and spy were not just blurred, they were often one and the same. A formal embassy was the perfect, unimpeachable cover for a deep and detailed intelligence operation. While an envoy presented gifts and spoke of peace, his true mission was to see everything, to assess the very foundations of the rival state. His report would not just record the pleasantries of court, but the strength of its walls, the wealth of its treasury, and the cracks in its political unity. When a Roman embassy traveled to the grand court of the Parthian king of kings at Ctesiphon, the spectacle was immense. The envoys would be led through bustling streets, past towering walls, and into the splendor of the royal palace. Officially, they were there to negotiate a treaty, discuss prisoner exchanges, or reaffirm the fragile peace along the Euphrates. But every step was an opportunity. The Roman diplomats, often seasoned senators or former generals, were trained observers. They noted the architecture and fortifications of the city, judging how difficult it would be to besiege. In the throne room, they counted the number and quality of the royal guard, assessing their armor and discipline. During feasts, they listened intently to the conversations of Parthian nobles, trying to detect whispers of dissent against the king or rivalries between powerful families. Even the gifts they received and the silks worn by courtiers were data points, clues to the empire's economic health and access to trade. A lavish court could signal great wealth, or it could be a carefully staged performance masking financial strain. The envoy's most crucial task was to gauge the king's own character, his ambitions, his health, and the loyalty he commanded. Would he honor a treaty? Was he planning a campaign? Was his heir strong? Or would a succession crisis soon weaken the empire? This human intelligence was priceless, offering a glimpse no network of frontier agents could provide. The Han Dynasty employed this same strategy along the Silk Road with brilliant effect. Their missions to the oasis kingdoms of Central Asia, like Kucha or Kashgar, were journeys of discovery in every sense. The official purpose was to secure alliances, promote trade, and ensure safe passage for caravans. But the scholars and generals who led these embassies were also masterful intelligence analysts. They meticulously recorded the military capacity of each city-state, noting the size of its garrison and the condition of its fortifications. They evaluated the land, estimating agricultural output to understand how well a kingdom could support itself or an invading army during a long conflict. Perhaps most importantly, they mapped the complex web of local politics. They identified which king was loyal to the Han, which one was secretly treating with the Xiongnu, and which rival princes might be cultivated as future allies. A Han diplomat might spend weeks as a guest in a king's palace, building trust through respectful dialogue and the exchange of sophisticated gifts like lacquerware and texts. All the while, he was building a psychological and strategic profile, determining whether this frontier kingdom was a sturdy pillar of Han influence or a fragile reed soon to bend before the wind from the steppe. His final report would not merely describe a city, it would classify it as a potential ally, a neutral buffer, or a future threat, directly shaping imperial policy for a generation. In this light, the grand embassies of antiquity were not just ceremonies of state. They were the most elegant and accepted form of espionage, where the most valuable secrets were not stolen in the dead of night, but openly observed in the bright light of a foreign court. A king's wealth was not just measured in gold, but in the secrets of his workshops. The silent war for borders extended far beyond troop movements and political alliances, into the very foundations of economic power. Protecting a frontier meant safeguarding the technological advantages that made an empire rich and its armies formidable. This was the shadowy realm of economic espionage and sabotage, where the most valuable prize was not a fortress but a formula. For centuries, China guarded the secret of silk production with the intensity of a state secret. The complex process of sericulture, from mulberry leaves to the delicate unraveling of silkworm cocoons, was a monopoly that fueled immense wealth and diplomatic influence along the Silk Road. The Han Dynasty imposed draconian laws, with the threat of severe punishment for anyone caught smuggling silkworm eggs or the knowledge of their cultivation beyond the empire's borders. This was not merely about protecting a luxury trade, it was about controlling a strategic asset. Silk was currency, tribute, and a tool of foreign policy. To let that secret slip was to hand a rival the keys to a treasury. Yet, secrets have a way of traveling. Legends speak of Byzantine monks in the 6th century, sent east on a mission that had little to do with faith and everything to do with commerce. They reportedly smuggled silkworm eggs out of China hidden within hollow walking sticks, breaking the monopoly and allowing Constantinople to establish its own silk industry. This single act of industrial theft reshaped the economic landscape of the Mediterranean, demonstrating that the most effective attack on a border could be an attack on its economy. The same fierce protection applied to metallurgy. The technique for making high-quality steel, whether it was the famed Serric steel from the East or the advanced methods of the Roman smiths, was a closely held military secret. The strength of a legionary's sword or a Parthian cataphract's armor could decide the outcome of a battle. Spies were tasked not only with counting enemy soldiers but with understanding how their weapons were made. Could you discover the source of their iron ore or the formula for the coal they used in their forges? Sabotage was also a tool. While direct attacks on economic infrastructure were common in warfare, the intelligence network could enable more subtle disruptions. Agents might spread disinformation to discredit a rival trading city's merchants, causing business to divert to a friendlier port. They could bribe officials at a distant mine to create shortages of a vital material like tin or copper, crippling an enemy's bronze production. Controlling trade routes was itself an exercise in economic intelligence. The power of the Sogdian merchants or the Nabateans of Petra stemmed from their exclusive knowledge of markets, prices, and safe passages. An empire that could co-opt or infiltrate these networks gained a decisive advantage. It could manipulate the flow of goods, create artificial scarcity to weaken a rival region, or ensure its own armies were supplied with the best materials at the lowest cost. In this light, a border was not just a line where armies stopped, it was a membrane regulating the flow of wealth and innovation. The spies who watched the mountain passes were also watching the caravans that moved through them, understanding that the strength of a wall ultimately depended on the economic vitality of the society it protected. The quest for security, therefore, demanded a dual vision, one eye on the enemy's camp and the other on his workshops and market squares. The most potent weapon in the silent war was not a hidden message, but a planted idea. Beyond gathering facts, ancient intelligence networks mastered the art of psychological warfare, using information not just to inform their own side, but to actively shape the reality of their enemies. Their goal was to demoralize, to confuse, and to instill a paralyzing sense of dread long before any army appeared on the horizon. This was security through manipulated perception. One of the most effective tactics was the deliberate spread of disinformation. A Roman intelligence officer on the German frontier might arrange for a captured tribal scout to overhear a carefully staged conversation between two centurions, discussing the imminent arrival of 3 full legions from Gaul when, in reality, no reinforcements were coming. This false report, carried back by the escaped scout, could cause a war band to disband or delay a planned raid for weeks, buying precious time. Similarly, the Han Dynasty was known to circulate exaggerated reports of bountiful harvests and full imperial granaries along the Xiongnu border, not merely as boast but as a strategic deterrent. The message to the nomadic confederation was clear: even if you raid, you will find little to plunder, and our armies are well fed and ready to pursue you. This weaponized rumor aimed to sap the enemy's will by making a potential attack seem futile or too costly before it even began. The theater of fear was another powerful psychological tool. Empires cultivated a deliberate myth around the omnipresence of their spies. The very name of the Persian agents, the eyes and ears of the king, was a masterpiece of psychological branding. It created an atmosphere where a governor in a distant satrapy or a chieftain in a border village could never be certain who was watching or listening. A traveling merchant, a new servant in the household, even a trusted ally, any of them could be an agent reporting directly to the royal court. This pervasive suspicion discouraged conspiracy and rebellion, not through the arrest of traitors, but through the fear of being discovered. The Roman use of the Frumentarii and later the agents in Rebus served a similar function. Their unannounced arrivals and broad authority were designed to be unsettling, a constant reminder that the emperor's reach extended to the very edge of the world. This cultivated a cult of imperial omniscience, where loyalty was maintained not just by oath, but by the anxious belief that disloyalty would inevitably be seen and punished. Finally, intelligence was used to stage dramatic, targeted shows of force designed to shatter an enemy's morale. This went beyond a simple parade of troops. Using precise information gathered by scouts and informants, a commander could orchestrate a demonstration of terrifying knowledge. Imagine a Parthian cavalry army arriving at a Roman allied town, not with a blind assault, but with a herald who called out the names of the town's leaders, detailed the exact weaknesses in its walls, and offered specific terms of surrender. This display, proving that the Parthians knew intimate details they should not have known, would suggest their intelligence network was already inside the community, making resistance seem hopeless. A Han general, informed by his network of a specific gathering of Xiongnu nobles at a sacred site, might launch a lightning cavalry strike not to destroy the force, but to appear suddenly at that remote location, demonstrate his ability to strike anywhere and then withdraw. The message was psychological devastation. We know where you are, we know what you are doing, and we can reach you at your most secure moments. These campaigns turned the border into a psychological space where the greatest victories were won not in physical combat, but in the minds of those who lived in its shadow, convincing them that resistance was futile, that betrayal was certain, and that the distant ruler's power was both infinite and intimately close. A governor's palace on the frontier was a world unto itself, a seat of power far from the emperor's watchful gaze. For the imperial center, this distance was a constant source of vulnerability. A rebellious provincial governor or a disloyal army commander could open a border fortress from the inside, an act more devastating than any external siege. Therefore, the primary target of many ancient intelligence networks was not the foreign enemy beyond the walls, but their own people within them. This was the paradox of frontier security. The greatest threat often came from the very individuals entrusted to defend the line. The Roman Frumentarii, those logistical officers turned imperial agents, found a core part of their mission in this internal vigilance. Traveling the empire's roads on supply business gave them the perfect pretext to visit frontier legions and provincial capitals. While ostensibly checking grain stores, they were also assessing the loyalty of the local commander. Was he enriching himself through corrupt deals with local tribes? Was he cultivating an unusually personal loyalty among his troops, using his own likeness on coins or monuments? The Frumentarius would listen to the complaints of junior officers and local merchants, gathering whispers that might never reach Rome. His report could trigger the quiet replacement of a suspect official long before any overt act of treason could unfold. This system created a chilling atmosphere of accountability, where a man in charge of thousands of soldiers knew that an unassuming supply auditor might be the emperor's most trusted ear. The Persian eyes and ears of the king operated with even more direct authority. These royal inspectors were feared precisely because their sole purpose was to watch the satraps, the provincial rulers who governed territories as large as ancient kingdoms. A satrap in charge of a wealthy border province like Egypt or Bactria commanded his own army, collected taxes, and administered justice. The temptation to declare independence was a perennial danger. The eyes and ears countered this by appearing without warning, armed with the authority to review any record, interrogate any official, and inspect any fortress. Their power lay in their unpredictability and their direct line back to the king. A satrap could never be sure if the merchant caravan that arrived yesterday or the new advisor in his court was in fact one of these royal watchers. This pervasive suspicion was a deliberate tool of control. It meant that planning a rebellion required not just convincing a circle of co-conspirators, but being absolutely certain that none of them were already agents of the crown. The psychological effect was profound, turning the vast expanse of the empire into a panopticon, where the ruler's presence was felt in every distant palace through the possibility of his invisible gaze. For these empires, a secure border required first a secure chain of command. The silent war for loyalty was fought in dining halls and military camps, in the audit of tax rolls and the casual conversations overheard in a forum. It was a grim but necessary calculus, understanding that the wall itself was useless if the gatekeeper had already decided to change sides. The invisible shield could shatter with a single, well-placed lie. For all their sophistication, ancient intelligence networks were terrifyingly fragile, and their catastrophic failures often redrew the map of the ancient world. These were not simple oversights, but systemic collapses where the very mechanisms of trust and knowledge broke down, leaving borders undefended and empires exposed. One of the most profound examples unfolded in the dense, rain-soaked forests of Germania in the year 9 AD. The Roman general Varus led 3 legions, nearly 20,000 men, deep into territory they believed was pacified. He relied heavily on intelligence provided by Arminius, a chieftain of the Cherusci tribe who had been raised in Rome, served in its auxiliary forces, and was considered utterly loyal. Arminius was the perfect asset, a cultural insider who provided Varus with constant, reassuring reports. He warned of minor, scattered rebellions that required the legions to divert their march down narrow, forested paths. In reality, Arminius was orchestrating a masterpiece of deception. He had united the fractious Germanic tribes into a single, hidden army, and he was using his privileged role within the Roman command structure to feed Varus precisely the information that would lead the legions into a perfectly prepared trap. The Roman network failed on multiple levels. It fatally misjudged Arminius's loyalty, believing cultural assimilation guaranteed political allegiance. It failed to cultivate alternative sources among the Germanic tribes to verify his claims, and it completely misunderstood the unity of the enemy, seeing only disconnected bands, not a coordinated force. The result was the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, a 3-day ambush that annihilated all 3 legions. Rome's frontier on the Rhine River collapsed overnight, and the empire's dream of conquering Germania died in those muddy woods, a disaster born from a fatal blind spot in its own intelligence web. Decades later, a different kind of failure unfolded in the sun-baked hills of the eastern frontier. In 260 AD, the Roman Emperor Valerian marched east to confront the resurgent Sassanid Persian Empire. The campaign ended not in a grand battle, but in a stunning personal catastrophe, the capture of the emperor himself. While the exact details are shrouded, historians note this event as a likely colossal intelligence failure. Valerian appears to have been lured into negotiations under a promise of truce, only to be seized by the Sassanid king Shapur I. This suggests a catastrophic breakdown in several areas. Roman agents may have been completely deceived about Shapur's true intentions, or perhaps key informants within the Persian court had been turned or silenced. There may also have been a fatal cultural misinterpretation, a Roman assumption that the protocols of parley would be honored, which the Sassanids exploited as a tactical ruse. The psychological and strategic impact was devastating. The capture of the living emperor, a figure considered semi-divine, was an unthinkable blow to Roman prestige. It emboldened enemies across the empire and exposed the eastern provinces to relentless invasion, demonstrating that even the highest levels of command could be left blind and vulnerable by a network that could not discern truth from treacherous theater. These collapses shared common, corrosive causes. The most direct was the compromised agent, the trusted insider like Arminius, whose betrayal could unravel an entire system. But often, the rot was more systemic. Networks could be crippled by corruption, where intelligence officers became more focused on selling their silence or fabricating reports for personal gain than on gathering accurate information. A border commander paying for false reports of calm to avoid being replaced would leave his sector perilously unprepared. Perhaps the most subtle and persistent cause was cultural misinterpretation. An intelligence network is a filter, and it can only interpret information through its own cultural lens. A Roman agent, schooled in the logic of states and treaties, might consistently underestimate the binding power of a tribal oath sworn at a sacred grove. A hand diplomat might misread the complex, fluid politics of the steppe, seeing a weak chieftain where there was a cunning negotiator playing a long game. When networks failed to truly understand the people and the land they were watching, they produced a dangerous illusion of knowledge, a map that was elegantly detailed but catastrophically wrong. The Silent War demanded not just spies but profound translators of human motive, a requirement that, when unmet, could bring walls, legions, and even emperors to ruin. The silent world of spies leaves few footprints. Reconstructing these hidden networks means sifting through fragments, where a broken piece of pottery or a single line in a legal text can whisper of the invisible war. The evidence is scarce, scattered, and often maddeningly indirect, yet it paints a picture far more vivid than myth. One of the most compelling sources comes not from grand palaces, but from the rubbish heaps of border forts. Archaeologists have uncovered countless ostraca, broken pieces of pottery used as cheap notepads. At Roman outposts in places like Egypt and Judea, these shards bear mundane supply lists, duty rosters, and personal letters. But among them are messages that raise eyebrows. A fragment might record the arrival of an unnamed traveler from across the frontier, noted as carrying no visible goods but asking many questions about troop numbers. Another might be a brief, cryptic warning from one officer to another, referencing a person to be watched without stating why. These are not smoking guns labeled espionage, but they are the bureaucratic echoes of a security-conscious mindset, the daily paperwork of vigilance where any stranger was a potential threat. The fort's daybook, a log of events, might dryly note that a local trader was detained for further questioning, or that scouts reported strange fires on a distant hill at night. These small, administrative details are the fossilized remains of the network's routine function. For a broader narrative, we depend on the historians who moved in elite circles, sometimes with access to official reports or veteran stories. The Roman historian Tacitus, with his sharp, cynical eye, provides invaluable glimpses. He doesn't give us a spy manual, but he weaves intelligence failures and successes into his histories. He recounts how the Germanic leader Arminius, once a trusted ally of Rome, used his insider knowledge to deceive and destroy 3 legions, a story that underscores the peril of misplaced trust in a single source. Later, Ammianus Marcellinus, a soldier historian of the 4th century, writes from the perspective of a military man. He describes the agents in Rebus not as shadowy villains, but as a fact of imperial life, couriers and inspectors whose sudden arrival could unsettle a corrupt governor. These accounts are not neutral documentaries. They are shaped by the biases and literary goals of their authors, but they confirm the existence and the feared reputation of these systems. They tell us how the empire wanted its security apparatus to be perceived as an omnipresent extension of the emperor's will. Perhaps the most telling evidence of all comes from the law. Legal codes from Rome to Babylon treat spying not as a romantic adventure, but as a serious crime against the state. The Theodosian Code, a compilation of Roman law, prescribes severe penalties for those caught revealing military secrets to barbarians. The language is telling. It speaks of passing plans of fortifications or disclosing the movements of armies. This legal framework proves that espionage was a recognized, constant danger that required formal deterrence. It shows a state thinking defensively about its information. Similarly, ancient Chinese legalist texts discuss the need for harsh punishments against those who would collude with external enemies, viewing the leakage of information as a direct threat to the realm's survival. These laws are the negative image of the intelligence network, outlining everything it was meant to prevent. They define the crime, and in doing so, they implicitly describe the value of the prize, the secret knowledge that kept the border secure. Even physical structures hold clues. The design of some frontier forts reveals a preoccupation with control and observation. Gates were often narrow and channeled, forcing all visitors into a single, easily watched passage. Commanding officers' quarters were sometimes positioned to oversee the main courtyard, a constant, visible reminder of authority. While not proof of spying per se, this architecture of surveillance created the environment in which an intelligence network could operate effectively, where movement was monitored and strangers were naturally scrutinized. Piecing together this mosaic from Ostraka, histories, laws, and stones is an exercise in reading between the lines. We are left not with a complete diagram of the ancient spy web, but with its shadow cast by the faint light of evidence that survived by chance. It confirms that this silent war was not a fantasy, but a tedious, meticulous, and utterly essential part of holding the line between order and chaos. The historical record of these silent wars is a hall of mirrors. We must tread carefully, for the very sources that describe ancient espionage are themselves products of the systems they document, often designed to persuade, intimidate, or glorify rather than to simply report facts. The grand accounts left by historians like Herodotus, Tacitus, and Sima Qian are invaluable, but they are not neutral databases. They are narratives shaped by powerful biases, national pride, and the literary expectations of their time. When Herodotus describes the Persian eyes and ears of the king, he paints a picture of flawless, omnipresent surveillance. This served a dual purpose for his Greek audience. It explained the impressive stability of the Persian Empire, but it also cast that empire as a tyrannical other, a place where no one could speak freely, in stark contrast to the idealized Greek love of liberty. The trope of the all-seeing king was potent propaganda, meant to inspire both fear and moral superiority. We must ask, was the network truly that impeccably efficient, or was its fearsome reputation, carefully cultivated by the Persians themselves, as important a tool as its actual operatives? The Romans were masters of this narrative craft. A Roman historian recounting the capture of an enemy spy would naturally emphasize Roman cleverness and the spy's foolishness. A story about uncovering a plot within a frontier garrison served to reinforce the image of imperial vigilance and the inevitable triumph of Roman order over chaos and deceit. These stories had a moral and political purpose, to reassure the public that the state was protected by divine favor and superior intellect. This means we cannot take tales of legendary spycraft at face value. The line between verifiable practice and literary exaggeration is often blurred. Most historians agree that organized intelligence corps existed. The evidence from law, archaeology, and the consistent need for such systems is too strong to deny. The basic practices we have discussed, scouts, coded messages, the cultivation of informants, are all logical, verifiable components of state security. However, the mythical aspects, the idea of a single flawless network where every whisper in a distant province reached the emperor's ear by morning, these are likely embellishments. They represent the ideal, the aura of power these empires wished to project. Deciphering the truth requires reading between the lines, cross-referencing sources, and looking for the humble, bureaucratic reality behind the grand legend. A single line in a dry administrative memo about the budget for courier horses tells us more about the mundane mechanics of the system than a thrilling page of Herodotus. The broken pottery shard with a fragmentary watch report is a clearer window into daily life on the frontier than the polished speech of an emperor taking credit for his network's omniscience. By separating the verifiable framework from the legendary aura, we move closer to understanding not just how these systems were said to work in epic tales, but how they actually functioned in the imperfect, uncertain world of the ancient frontier, where human error, bad weather, and simple miscommunication were as constant a threat as any foreign army. Despite the vast distances and cultural divides separating them, the empires of antiquity arrived at strikingly similar solutions for guarding their frontiers. The Roman, Persian, and Chinese systems, along with others, were not identical, but they converged on a set of universal principles, a shared logic born from a common problem: how to see and secure a line that stretched beyond the horizon. The first and most fundamental principle was the absolute need to control the flow of information itself. Every empire understood that knowledge was a resource as vital as water or grain, and it had to be managed with equal care. This meant not just gathering secrets but rigorously filtering them. A flood of raw, unverified rumors from the borderlands was worse than useless. It could paralyze a central command with conflicting reports. Therefore, each system developed a hierarchy of trust, a way to sift the vital signal from the noisy chatter. The Persian eyes and ears, the Roman agents in Rebus, and the hand diplomatic envoys all served as this critical filter. They were not mere couriers, but analysts in motion, trusted to evaluate what they saw and heard, to attach their judgment to a report before it traveled up the chain. Their very existence acknowledged a universal truth: that information unchecked is chaos, but information curated is power. This curation depended entirely on the second shared principle, the delicate art of managing trusted agents. Empires could not afford to view every border scout or paid informant with equal suspicion, yet they could never afford them complete trust. The solution was a layered system of human reliability. At the core were the official operatives, the Frumentarii or the royal inspectors, whose loyalty was cemented by their place within the imperial bureaucracy and their direct line to the center. Their reliability was the bedrock. Around them orbited a constellation of local assets, the chieftains, merchants, and disaffected nobles whose loyalties were negotiable. Managing these individuals required a blend of tangible reward and psychological pressure. Payment had to be consistent and valuable, but it was always coupled with the implicit threat of exposure or the withdrawal of imperial favor. The story of Arminius and Varus was a catastrophic lesson learned by all, a warning that over-reliance on a single, seemingly assimilated asset could collapse an entire frontier. The universal response was to cultivate multiple, competing sources, so that the story of a gathering enemy army had to be corroborated by a scout, a trader, and a turned spy before it was believed. This practice of cross-verification, born from painful experience, became a non-negotiable rule across civilizations. Gathering and verifying intelligence was meaningless unless it could be acted upon with decisive speed. This leads to the third commonality, the critical integration of intelligence with military command. An impeccable report about an imminent raid was worthless if it sat on a bureaucrat's desk in the capital while the border fort was overrun. Each successful system created direct channels between the intelligence apparatus and the frontier generals. The Roman legate on the Rhine might receive his warning directly from the explorators who had just ridden in, their dust still on their cloaks. The hand general at the wall would get his orders based on the latest assessments from the protector of the dependent states, often with the envoy who gathered the information standing right beside him. This integration ensured that knowledge translated into action. It meant that the map drawn by spies could immediately become the march route for an army, that a report of tribal discord could trigger a preemptive diplomatic mission the very next day. The intelligence network was not a separate entity. It was the nervous system of the frontier, and its signals had to connect directly to the muscles of military response without delay. Finally, all these empires wrestled with the same enduring paradox, the balance between central control and frontier autonomy. A king or emperor in a distant capital needed to command his borders, but he could not micromanage a crisis unfolding weeks of travel away. The intelligence system became the primary tool for navigating this dilemma. Central control was maintained through the fear and oversight imposed by the inspectors and the direct lines of communication they protected. The center demanded reports, it audited loyalty, and it set the grand strategy. Yet it was forced to grant autonomy in execution. The local commander, armed with the best intelligence gathered from his own network of scouts and informants, had to be trusted to make snap decisions, to launch a patrol, to close a gate, or to strike a fleeting target. The intelligence web made this grant of autonomy less risky, because the center was kept informed, often in near real time relative to the era. It could trust that the man on the wall was acting on good information and in line with broader imperial interests. The system created a framework of accountability, not of stifling control. In the end, whether it was Rome, Persia, or China, the silent shield was built from these same essential materials: a controlled flow of knowledge, a calculated management of human trust, a seamless link between seeing and striking, and a fragile, necessary balance between the command of the center and the wisdom of the edge. Their borders held not because their walls were unbreachable, but because their understanding of these principles was profound. These silent networks did not vanish with the fall of ancient capitals. The principles of border espionage proved as durable as the stone of their walls, flowing into new empires and medieval kingdoms, constantly adapting to new threats while relying on the same fundamental human craft. In the Eastern Roman Empire, centered on Constantinople, the Roman model was refined into a more disciplined and bureaucratic machine. The agents in rebus, the men engaged in affairs, evolved from the old Frumentarii into a formal inspectorate and courier service, their journeys along the vast road network serving as the nervous system for an empire perpetually on the defensive. They ensured that intelligence from the volatile frontiers with the Sassanid Persians, and later the Arab caliphates, could reach the emperor with ruthless efficiency, a direct line of sight maintained through relentless administrative oversight. This Byzantine system became a template, a living archive of Roman statecraft in intelligence. As new powers rose, they absorbed and adapted these old models. The early Islamic caliphates, managing a realm that swiftly stretched from Spain to the Indus, faced the same classic dilemma of controlling distant governors and securing far-flung borders. They institutionalized their own forms of the Barid, a postal and intelligence service that echoed the Persian royal road and the Roman cursus publicus. Official couriers and inspectors traveled these routes, carrying dispatches and, just as importantly, observing the loyalty of provincial emirs and the mood of frontier populations. The caliphate's intelligence efforts were deeply pragmatic, often employing knowledgeable individuals from conquered territories, including former Byzantine officials or Persian administrators, who brought with them generations of institutional knowledge on how to watch a border and manage a spy network. This was not invention, but sophisticated inheritance. In the fragmented world of medieval Europe, where central authority was often weak, the principles of espionage did not disappear. They scaled down and became more personal. Kings and great lords maintained networks of trusted agents, often clerics or merchants, to watch rival nobles and monitor restless border regions. The core techniques remained unchanged: the cultivation of informants in rival courts, the use of coded messages, and the reliance on travelers for news. A medieval baron guarding a marchland between England and Scotland, or between Christian and Muslim Spain, faced challenges remarkably similar to those of a Roman legate on the Rhine. He needed early warning of raids, knowledge of alliances, and eyes on the loyalties of his own vassals. His tools were the same: human loyalty, purchased information, and the swiftest horse available. For nearly 2 millennia, from the fall of Rome until the dawn of the 20th century, the essential mechanics of frontier intelligence remained rooted in the human element: the agent in the field, the trusted courier, the turned spy. The technological context was stagnant. Communication still moved at the speed of a horse or a sailing ship, and surveillance was limited by the horizon of a hill or the range of a telescope. What changed were the bureaucracies around these actors and the scale of their operations, but the silent war was still fought person to person, secret to secret. This long continuity underscores a profound truth. The ancient systems worked because they solved a timeless human problem: the need to see beyond the next hill and to trust the word of the person who had been there. Their legacy is not a list of forgotten tricks, but a foundational chapter in the endless story of how societies try to secure their edges. A story that would only truly transform when the telegraph, the radio, and the satellite finally shattered the ancient constraints of distance and secrecy. The silent shield was not an accessory to ancient power, it was its very fabric. Our journey across these forgotten frontiers reveals a truth more profound than any single spy or cipher. These complex espionage networks were not a shadowy sideshow. They were a foundational pillar of statecraft, as essential to border defense as the legionary's sword or the mason's trowel. They formed a sophisticated, invisible infrastructure that worked in seamless tandem with visible walls and standing armies. The physical frontier was the body, but the intelligence network was its nervous system, sensing danger, processing threats, and coordinating a response long before the first stone was launched from a rampart. This was security reimagined not as a barrier, but as a pervasive awareness. What emerges from the dust of Ostraka and the pages of historians is a portrait of remarkable human ingenuity confronting a universal dilemma. From the palaces of Rome and Ctesiphon to the watchtowers of the Great Wall, ancient leaders faced the same agonizing limit, the horizon. They could command loyalty for 100 miles, but what lay beyond the next river, past the next mountain range? The answer was not to conquer the unknown, but to make it knowable. They built machines of perception, human machines composed of merchants with double ledgers, scouts with keen eyes, and diplomats with carefully memorized scripts. These systems turned the terrifying emptiness beyond the border into a landscape that could be measured, understood, and to a degree controlled. The story of ancient espionage, therefore, is not merely a tale of clever tricks. It is the story of the perpetual human struggle to secure the frontier, which is always, at its heart, a struggle against uncertainty itself. The legacy of these networks whispers to us from the past, reminding us that history is shaped as much by hidden currents as by visible events. The fall of legions, the survival of empires, the very routes of trade and culture were often decided not in the thunder of battle, but in the quiet moments before, when a coded message was decoded, a turned agent chose his side, or a watchtower beacon flared against a dark sky. It challenges us to look at the ancient world with new eyes, to see past the monuments and battlefields to the intricate, unseen webs that held them together. So we are left to wonder, if such sophisticated systems of information and control protected the borders of antiquity, what other hidden architectures, what other invisible shields quietly shaped the rise and fall of civilizations, waiting for their stories to be told?